The starport hummed with energy, a constant rhythm of engines, chatter, and the occasional alarm. Ships of every shape and size glided past the wide observation windows, their hulls gleaming under the bright lights of the port. For most, it was a place of wonder, filled with travelers and merchants chasing their fortunes or dreams. For Jaren, it was another day in a life that seemed to stretch endlessly with struggle and hard work. Jaren wiped the oil from his hands onto the rag tucked in his belt and glanced around. His small workshop sat tucked in a quieter section of the starport, surrounded by larger, more impressive repair bays. He had talent, that much was certain. A ship would sputter and cough into his care, and he could make it run like new, sometimes even better than the factory intended. But talent alone did not pay the bills. Credits were hard to earn, and opportunities were rarer than the clean water he sometimes found himself wishing for. This day, however, carried a hint of change. A messenger had appeared at his shop earlier, handing him a formal invitation on thick, cream-colored paper. It was an unusual thing, even for someone as unnoticed as Jaren. The script was elegant, the seal embossed with the imperial crest. The invitation read simply, "Your presence is requested at the imperial banquet this evening." Jaren had stared at the paper for several long moments, unsure whether it was a joke, a mistake, or perhaps even some sort of trap. Invitations to the imperial palace were never given to a mechanic who spent more time under starships than under chandeliers. But curiosity, and perhaps a quiet hope for something extraordinary, had led him here. He adjusted his worn jacket, making sure it looked presentable despite the smudges of grease. It would not impress a noble, but he hoped it would at least keep him from being thrown out immediately. With a deep breath, he walked toward the transport that would take him to the palace, nerves twisting in his stomach. Every step made him question the decision. What was he, a simple mechanic, doing at a table meant for princes, princesses, and high-ranking officials? The palace rose into view like a crown of steel and glass, its towers reaching toward the sky in shining arcs. Guards in gleaming armor stood at every entrance, their eyes sharp, their stance unyielding. Jaren was nervous, but he refused to show it. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone used to working with machines that could malfunction at any moment. Here, he thought, he would need that same calm. Inside the banquet hall was a world apart from the starport. Massive chandeliers hung from the high ceilings, casting golden light across tables covered in white cloth and crystal glasses. The air smelled of spices and roasted meats, a scent that made Jaren's stomach grumble despite his attempts to remain composed. Servants moved gracefully, carrying trays of food, while nobles whispered and laughed in carefully measured tones. Jaren's eyes scanned the room, looking for the table mentioned in the invitation. He had assumed it would be clearly marked, but nothing in this vast hall resembled a guide for a humble mechanic. Taking a deep breath, he approached a table that seemed accessible. It was closer to the center than he expected, and the occupants looked at him with faint surprise. He did not notice their expressions at first, too focused on finding a seat. He slid into the chair, trying to appear casual, hoping that no one would demand he move. At first, there was silence. Then came the whispers. Heads turned, eyes darting toward him, some filled with amusement, others with disbelief. Jaren remained still, pretending not to hear them, though his stomach flipped. Across the table sat a young woman in a gown of deep blue and silver, her posture perfect, her gaze sharp. She was stunning in a way that made even the grand hall seem small by comparison. Her hair was dark and glossy, framing a face both delicate and commanding. The young woman studied him in silence for a long moment, her eyes narrowing slightly. Then, unexpectedly, a small smirk appeared on her lips. "You are far from the kitchen, I think," she said, her voice light but carrying an unmistakable authority. Jaren blinked. He had expected anger or indignation, not humor. He forced a small smile. I was invited," he said, holding up the embossed invitation. "I think this is my table." The smirk on her face widened into a faint, knowing smile. "Most do not think the same," she replied. "I am Princess Leora, daughter of the Emperor, and you are sitting at my table." Jaren's stomach sank. He had guessed as much, of course, but hearing the words aloud made the situation feel real. I didn't mean any offense," he stammered. I didn't know where to sit." Leora's laughter, soft but musical, surprised him. She did not scold him or demand he move. She leaned back slightly in her chair, watching him with curiosity. "You are not like the others," she said. Most would quiver or apologize until their tongue twisted. "You—" Jaren relaxed slightly, encouraged by her tone. He had spent his life speaking plainly. Lies and flattery had never been his skill. "I fix machines," he said. "I do not know much about royal rules." Leora's eyes twinkled. "A mechanic," she repeated. "And yet, here you are, bold enough to sit with the daughter of the Emperor." Bold or foolish, I cannot yet decide. Before Jaren could respond, the hall's attention was pulled toward the center. The banquet had begun in earnest. Servants carried trays of exotic dishes while musicians played soft melodies that floated through the air. Despite the grandeur, Jaren felt a strange sense of calm. The princess across from him seemed to treat him as if he belonged. For a moment he forgot about the whispers and the glances from other nobles. Conversation with Leora was unexpected. She asked about his work, not in the polite, empty way the court was accustomed to, but with genuine curiosity. "How do you repair a hyperdrive engine?" she asked, leaning slightly forward, her interest clear. Jaren shrugged modestly. "Piece by piece," he said. "You figure out what's broken, what's worn out, and replace it. Sometimes you have to think of a solution no one has tried before. Machines. They reward patience and careful hands." Leora's gaze lingered on him, thoughtful.
"You think like a human?" she said softly. "Not like a noble or a courtier."
"I have been surrounded by politeness and false smiles for years. You seem real." Her words struck him more than he expected. He had never considered being real as a gift. It was just how he existed, day to day, always facing problems and solving them without concern for appearances. Yet here, in the midst of splendor and hierarchy, it seemed remarkable. The conversation continued, flowing more easily than Jaren imagined possible. He learned that Leora had been paralyzed in an accident years ago, a fact whispered about in the palace but rarely discussed. She moved with difficulty, relying on aids and special devices to navigate the grand halls. And yet, her mind was sharp, her humor quick, and her curiosity unrelenting. As the evening progressed, an incident occurred that drew everyone's attention. A minor malfunction in the hall's energy system caused the lights to flicker, and a section of the music to cut out abruptly. The nobles murmured in alarm, unsure of what to do, while the servants scrambled nervously. Jaren's instincts took over. "Step back," he said quietly to Leora. Then, moving swiftly, he located the source, a failing power conduit that threatened to shut down the hall entirely. Using his tools, his hands working with practiced precision, he repaired the conduit in moments that felt like hours. The lights stabilized, the music resumed, and a collective sigh of relief swept through the room. Leora's eyes widened with amazement. "You saved the banquet," she said softly. "Not with swords or armies, but with your hands." Jaren shrugged, feeling slightly embarrassed by the attention. "It's just what I do," he said, trying to downplay it. "I fix what's broken." She smiled, genuinely this time. "Not everyone could do that," she said. "Not everyone would have the courage to act." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversation, laughter, and subtle glances. Jaren found himself enjoying the experience far more than he expected. He was a stranger here, a mechanic among royals, yet he felt a connection that neither wealth nor power could create. Leora, in turn, seemed invigorated by his presence, as if his simplicity and honesty were a fresh breeze in the stifling palace air. By the time the banquet ended, Jaren realized that he had been invited not just to eat or witness royalty, but to challenge the very idea of what it meant to be human in a world dominated by hierarchy and protocol. He had entered as a mechanic, unassuming and unsure, but he left having planted the first seeds of a friendship, and perhaps something greater, with the princess. Outside the palace, the cool night air greeted him as he walked back toward the transport. He could still hear the distant hum of engines and the chatter of travelers, a familiar and comforting sound. For the first time in a long while, Jaren felt hope. Not hope for wealth or recognition, but hope for something deeper. Connection, purpose, and the chance to prove that courage and skill could shine brighter than any throne. And somewhere behind him, in the palace he had disrupted yet somehow won over, Princess Leora smiled to herself, thinking of the mechanic who had picked the wrong table, and yet somehow had chosen exactly the right seat in her life. The morning after the banquet, Jaren returned to his small workshop, but the world felt different. He moved among engines and tools with a new sense of purpose. Something about the night before had shaken him, not fear, but excitement. He had sat at a table meant for royalty, laughed with Princess Leora, and even fixed a problem that could have embarrassed the Emperor himself. It felt impossible, yet it had happened. As he wiped his hands on a rag, the memory of her smile lingered. Jaren had always been practical, focused on machines and tasks rather than people. Yet Leora's sharp wit and quick mind had drawn him in. He wondered if their meeting had been a coincidence or fate. Either way, he could not stop thinking about it. The day passed in a blur of work. Engines hummed, tools clattered, and the familiar smell of grease filled the air. Still, his mind wandered back to the palace. By mid-afternoon, a message arrived, this time delivered by a palace courier. It was short and formal. Your assistance is requested by Princess Leora. Come to the palace at your earliest convenience. Jaren blinked, his heart racing. The words were simple, but their meaning was extraordinary. The princess wanted him. He took a deep breath, tucked a wrench into his belt, and left for the palace, feeling a mix of anticipation and nerves. Upon arriving, he was guided through vast corridors, lined with portraits of ancestors, each one more intimidating than the last. Guards followed silently, their eyes sharp, but not threatening. They brought him to a workshop within the palace, smaller than the banquet hall, yet filled with strange devices and tools that even Jaren had never seen. Princess Leora was there, seated comfortably in a specially designed chair that supported her paralyzed legs. Despite her condition, she radiated energy. Her eyes lit up when she saw him. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice warm, almost playful. "I hope you did not think my invitation rude or sudden." Jaren shook his head. "Not at all," he replied. I'm honored." She studied him carefully. "I have a problem," she said. "Something I believe you can help with, though it is not a typical engine or starship. I want to move more freely. This chair and these devices help, but I want to test new possibilities. I need someone who can think differently, someone who does not follow the usual rules." Jaren felt a spark of excitement. It was one thing to fix machines, another to solve a problem that could change a person's life. "I'll do my best," he said. Leora smiled. "Good. I have faith in your hands and your mind." For the next hours, they worked together. Jaren examined the devices surrounding her chair, motors, joints, and levers that were meant to give her movement. He studied each part carefully, taking notes, adjusting components, and suggesting improvements. Leora watched, fascinated by his methods. "You see solutions differently," she said. "Most engineers would follow instructions exactly. You improvise.
Jaren shrugged. I fix what is broken.
If I cannot follow the instructions, I make my own path. Leora's smile grew. That is what I need. Someone who can see what others cannot. They worked for days, often late into the night. Jaren suggested modifications to motors, lighter materials, and alternative controls that could respond to her subtle movements. Leora practiced, learning to trust the new systems and her own abilities. Each small success brought joy, laughter, and sometimes frustration when things did not work as expected. During one session, Leora leaned forward slightly and attempted a movement she had not been able to perform in years. The device responded perfectly, and her hands hovered above the controls with a sense of control she had not felt since her accident. I did it, she whispered, almost in disbelief.
I really did it.
Jaren grinned.
You did it.
You just needed the right tools and the right hands to help. Their bond grew stronger with each day. Leora shared stories of court intrigue, of the endless expectations and subtle dangers of life in the palace. Jaren listened, offering advice in simple, practical ways. He did not flinch at the politics or the power struggles. Instead, he helped her see solutions where others only saw obstacles. In turn, Leora introduced him to aspects of palace life he had never imagined. He attended meetings with aides, observed discussions of policy, and even glimpsed the weight of responsibility that rested on her young shoulders. Yet, he never felt overwhelmed. Leora trusted him, and that trust allowed him to act with confidence. One afternoon, as the sun streamed through the tall windows of the workshop, Leora looked at him thoughtfully. "Do you ever think about what it means to be human?" she asked. Not the title or the station, but the ability to act, to create, to overcome. Jaren paused, considering her words.
I think about it every day, he said finally. Machines can break.
Ships can fail. Life can be unfair. But humans, we fix, we adapt, we fight. That is what makes us human. Not what we wear or who we serve. What we do. Leora nodded, a faint smile playing on her lips. And sometimes, the smallest actions, like fixing a machine or sitting at the wrong table, can change everything. Their work was interrupted one evening by a sudden alert. The palace's security system had detected unusual movement near the outer perimeter. Guards moved swiftly, and Leora's aides whispered about possible intruders. Jaren, calm as ever, examined the alert system. It's not a large force, he said. Likely a test or scouts. Nothing too dangerous if we act wisely. Leora studied the readouts with interest. Show me, she said. I want to understand, even if I cannot move quickly. Jaren explained the sensors, the response protocols, and the possible strategies to protect the palace. Leora listened intently, asking questions, suggesting ideas, and testing him with hypotheticals. By the end, she had not only learned from him, but contributed solutions he had not considered. Days turned into weeks, and the partnership between mechanic and princess deepened. Jaren taught Leora that intelligence and skill could surpass status or limitations. Leora reminded Jaren that courage and heart could influence even the most powerful. Together, they built more than mobility devices. They built trust, friendship, and mutual respect. However, their collaboration did not go unnoticed. Courtiers whispered behind closed doors, suspicious of the mechanic who spent so much time with the princess. Some saw him as an interloper, a threat to the established order. Others were intrigued, wondering if his skill and bravery might serve the empire in ways beyond the palace walls. One evening, as Jaren prepared to leave the workshop, Leora looked at him with a serious expression. I trust you, Jaren, she said quietly, more than anyone else in this palace, and I believe together we can achieve things that no one else can. Jaren felt a weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders, but he did not shy away.
Then we will, he said simply. We will make it work.
The weeks that followed were filled with challenges. Devices malfunctioned, prototypes failed, and political pressure mounted. Yet every obstacle was met with determination and collaboration. Jaren's hands repaired what broke. His mind solved problems no one else could. And Leora's insight guided their efforts with precision and courage. The culmination of their work came when a new mobility device, sleek and responsive, allowed Leora to move more freely than she had in years. She navigated the palace corridors with confidence, her movements smooth and deliberate. The court watched in amazement, realizing that the princess was no longer defined by her paralysis, and that the mechanic beside her had played a crucial role in her transformation. Even the emperor, stern and cautious, could not hide his approval. He observed quietly, noting the trust and ingenuity displayed by both. Leora's independence was growing, and Jaren's skill and bravery were earning respect in a place where merit often came second to status. In the quiet moments when the palace was still and the lights dimmed, Jaren and Leora would sit together, sharing stories, laughter, and plans for the future. The starport and the palace, the mechanic and the princess, seemed to belong to each other in a way that transcended wealth, power, and circumstance. Jaren realized that his life had changed forever. He was no longer just a mechanic scraping by in a starport. He had become a partner in a journey of discovery, courage, and human triumph. Leora had become more than a princess. She had become a friend, a student of skill, and a companion in innovation. And so the days continued, filled with work, learning, and quiet victories. Together they proved that ingenuity, courage, and heart could overcome the strictest rules, the heaviest limitations, and even the most suspicious court. Humanity, in all its resilience and brilliance, shone brighter than the palace lights or the grandest halls. Weeks passed since Jaren and Princess Leora had begun working closely together. Their partnership had grown into something extraordinary. The princess had learned to move with her new devices, and Jaren had discovered a world far beyond engines and starships, a world of politics, intrigue, and unexpected friendship. But with trust and accomplishment came new challenges. Not everyone in the palace welcomed the changes they represented. The morning was quiet. In the workshop, the sun filtering through the tall windows, Jaren was adjusting a mobility joint when a sharp knock sounded at the door. A palace aide entered, looking nervous. "Princess Leora requests your presence immediately," he said. "There is a situation outside the palace." Jaren's stomach tightened. He had grown used to her challenges in the workshop, but danger outside these walls was a different matter. He followed the aide quickly, weaving through corridors that now felt less intimidating and more familiar, thanks to the time he had spent in the palace. In the audience chamber, Leora waited with a serious expression. Several advisors and guards surrounded her, their faces tight with concern. A holographic map projected in the center of the room showed activity near the outer perimeter. Unauthorized movement, small but deliberate. Someone, or something, was testing the palace defenses. Jaren leaned closer to study the map. It's not a full-scale attack, he said calmly, tracing the projected paths. Looks like scouts or spies. They want to see how we respond. Leora's eyes narrowed. Could they be looking for a weakness?
"A chance to take me?"
she asked, her voice steady despite the tension. Jaren nodded. "That's a possibility, but if we act carefully, we can control the situation."
I can help reinforce the sensors and create traps to slow them down. You can use your devices to monitor the areas they might approach.
Together, we can make sure nothing happens. The princess glanced at him, a mixture of gratitude and determination in her gaze. "I trust you, Jaren, more than anyone else here.
Let's make sure this palace remains secure." For the next hours, they worked together to fortify the palace defenses.
Jaren modified sensors, installed improvised traps, and devised alert systems that even the seasoned guards had never considered. Leora tested the mobility devices, moving swiftly through corridors to check vantage points and verify sensor coverage. Her movements were precise, confident, and for the first time, independent in a way the court had never witnessed. As night fell, the palace prepared for the unknown. Jaren stationed himself near a critical entry point, tools and improvised weapons within reach. Leora, in her mobility device, took her position at a central observation area, her eyes scanning multiple screens and sensors. Every movement they made was calculated, their minds working in unison. Suddenly, an alert sounded. Figures were approaching the palace's perimeter, moving cautiously, but with purpose. Jaren's heart raced, but he remained calm. "They're here," he whispered. "Stay ready." The first scout triggered a trap, a small shock device Jaren had improvised. The figure yelped and stumbled, alerted others nearby. Jaren acted quickly, using his knowledge of mechanical systems to trigger a series of defensive mechanisms. Gates slammed into position, energy nets deployed, and the approaching figures were slowed. Leora's voice came through the comm system. "They're regrouping. They won't give up easily." Jaren adjusted a sensor, sending a signal to redirect the intruders toward another trap. "We'll make them think twice before trying anything more," he said, sweat on his brow but his hands steady. For hours, the skirmish continued. It was a test of intellect, speed, and strategy, rather than brute force. The intruders were skilled, but they underestimated the combination of Jaren's ingenuity and Leora's calculated control. Time and again, the palace defenses thwarted them, forcing them to retreat. When the last of the intruders fled into the night, the tension in the palace slowly eased. Guards and advisors who had been skeptical of the mechanic's presence now looked at him with respect. Even the Emperor, who had watched from a distance, gave a subtle nod of approval. Leora, breathing heavily from the adrenaline, turned to Jaren. "We did it," she said, a smile breaking across her face. "We stopped them." Jaren allowed himself a small grin. "We did it together," he corrected. "You were amazing out there." She shook her head. "No, you were amazing. You thought of everything, anticipated every move. I just followed your lead." Jaren's cheeks tinged with color. Praise from royalty was something he had never imagined. It wasn't just me. You trusted yourself, and you trusted me. That's what made the difference. The following days were filled with reflection and cautious planning. The intruders' motives remained unknown, but it was clear that the palace's security had been tested and proven strong. Jaren and Leora continued their work in the workshop, refining the mobility devices and planning improvements to the palace defenses. Their bond, strengthened by shared challenge and trust, had become unbreakable. Yet, even as they celebrated their victory, whispers of dissent grew louder in the palace corridors. Courtiers and advisors who resented change began plotting against them. They saw Jaren as an outsider, a simple mechanic whose presence with the princess threatened the balance of power. They whispered to one another, questioning the Emperor's judgment, and some even suggested that the mechanic be removed entirely. Jaren remained unaware of the full scope of the intrigue. He focused on his work, on Leora, and on the safety of the palace. But he began to notice subtle signs. A guard giving him a wary glance, an aide lingering in the workshop to observe him. A message, delayed or altered. He realized that not all threats came from outside the walls. Some were much closer. One evening, as he worked late in the workshop, Leora approached him. "Do you feel it too?" she asked softly. Jaren looked up, wiping grease from his hands. "I've sensed something," he admitted. "Some people don't like the changes we've made. Some think I don't belong here." She nodded. It's not surprising they fear what they don't understand. They fear someone who acts with honesty and skill instead of politics and titles." Jaren considered her words. He had never cared about status or recognition. But now, he realized it could be dangerous. "Then we need to be careful," he said. We cannot let their fears put us at risk, or the palace. Leora smiled faintly. I trust you, Jaren, and I think you understand more than anyone what it means to protect something important. Let's face them together, if it comes to that. Days later, the court convened for a formal audience. Whispers and suspicion filled the room as Jaren was brought before the Emperor and his council. Questions were asked, veiled accusations made, and the tension was palpable. Yet Jaren remained calm, answering each inquiry with honesty, clarity, and quiet confidence. When the council seemed to push too far, Leora spoke. Jaren has proven himself, she said firmly.
He is no threat. He is my friend, my partner in solving problems, and he has saved this palace more than once.
I trust him, and I will not let fear dictate my decisions. The room fell silent. Noble shifted uncomfortably, realizing that the princess's authority combined with Jaren's skill could not be dismissed. The Emperor's expression was unreadable. But he nodded slowly, a sign of approval and recognition. After the audience, Jaren returned to the workshop, exhausted but unbroken. Leora followed, leaning slightly in her mobility device, her eyes thoughtful. They will test us again, she said quietly.
There will always be those who fear change, but we are stronger than they know. Jaren nodded, feeling a sense of purpose he had never known before.
We are, he agreed, and together we can handle anything. In the weeks that followed, their work continued, blending innovation, courage, and strategy. They improved the mobility devices, enhanced the palace defenses, and trained in tactics that combined brains, skill, and human ingenuity. The palace, once a place of rules and hierarchy, became a space where creativity and courage could flourish. The story of the mechanic and the princess spread quietly through the palace. Those who had doubted them began to watch with respect and curiosity. Even the Emperor, stern and cautious, began to see the value of Jaren's presence, not just as a mechanic, but as a symbol of what humans could achieve with intelligence, courage, and determination. And yet, in the quiet moments of the night, Jaren and Leora would sit together in the workshop, reflecting on the challenges they had faced. They knew that danger and intrigue were never far away, that the palace and its people depended on their skill and courage, but they also knew that together they could face any obstacle, overcome any threat, and prove that humanity, in its resilience and ingenuity, could shine brighter than fear or suspicion. For Jaren, the world had changed. He was no longer just a mechanic in a starport. He was a partner, a protector, and a friend to someone whose strength inspired him to be better, to think sharper, and to act boldly. For Leora, the experience had shown her that even in a world of rules, restrictions, and expectations, there were paths to freedom, courage, and trust. Together, they had faced their first real challenge and emerged stronger, wiser, and more united than ever. And as night fell over the palace, they knew that the true test was yet to come.